Oscar Mike Radio. I mentioned it's a great name for a podcast, and you sent me the notes. It's on the move. We're on a mission. I think that's very clever. I thought Talking with Tarashuk was a clever name, but I gotta say Oscar Mike. It just rolls off the tongue. Oscar Mike and the radio. I love the radio because podcasts. Someone tells me, "Wait, what is a podcast?" Go, it's internet radio in the most basic, simple form. It's internet radio, or it's a personally and professionally oriented discussion centered around select topics. That's what a podcast is. That's Will Tarashuk original. You can use that one.
All right.
So, whose idea was it for you to start a podcast? I know you were always interested in radio. You got a few jobs here, but who came to you and said, "You know what, Travis, you need a podcast"? And tell me why it was Keith Hayes.
I had the idea for the podcast.
Awesome. And what year was this?
So I started thinking about the podcast in 2015, and the reason I thought about it was I was doing guest hosting work with a program at WVBF AM 1530 in Taunton, Massachusetts, with a show called South Shore News and Views, and they liked having me on. I'm like, this radio stuff is pretty cool. And you got to understand that I grew up. My dad would listen to Garrison Keillor and a lot of Rush Limbaugh, all those guys on talk radio. Talk radio was his thing. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. And my first real job as a kid was working for 98 Rocks in Shreveport, Louisiana, doing surveys about rock music and country in a countrified world down there. So that was really interesting. But I loved it. I loved the fact that, someone's voice, 100 miles away, 1,000 miles away, could reach you in your car and your tractor in the gym, and you could get something out of that. And I'm like, that was just always cool to me, but I never knew how to do it. And then I found out to have a terrestrial radio show was a minimum of $2,000 a month where I was. I'm like, well, I can't do that. But this podcasting thing came up. I started batting around how I would do it and try to figure out all the things. And, about this time, 7 years ago, almost, let's just say the first week in March, right? 7 years ago, literally almost to the day, someone gave me this flyer saying, hey, there's this Dale Dorman Media Day at Massasoit Community College. And they're going to, and they're going to have this guy named Keith Hayes with Ken Diesel of Hoobazoo. Like, I don't know what Hoobazoo is. I looked at the website. I'm like, all right. And you're going to talk about podcasting. I'm like, well, this college is only like 3 miles from my place. I got the time to take. I'm going to go and check this thing out and see what this guy thinks. And so I walk in this room, and there's this, big guy and, his buddy Ken up there talking about podcasting, their show, The Booth, and drafting the circuits and how they did it, and how podcasting was really going to be the next wave, and you could do it if you really wanted to. And I was hooked. Will, I was like, yes, this had to be a providence, a sign, the supreme commandant, the big dude upstairs saying, hey, I put it in front of you. You got to pick this up and take it. And I'm like,
it gave you purpose.
Right. So I said, hey, Keith, I'm Travis Partington, blah, 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 blah. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I want to do this podcast. And Keith looked at me for a good 10 seconds. He's like, okay, I think this could work. Okay. So hit me up afterwards and we'll talk. And early May, he meets me and says, look, you got to do all these things to get your show ready. I'm like, for real? He's like, yeah. So I made a list. I'm a big Microsoft OneNote guy. I got a list going. I'm like, okay, and then over the next 6 weeks, I'm like, oh my God, we're getting ready to launch this thing. And in July, I think it was July 16th is when I first recorded Oscar Mike Radio. It got going, but Keith started guiding me through the content creation process, right? What to do and what not to do. Because look, Will, my first 30 shows absolutely stunk.
You know what? I'm glad you said that, because this is a big lesson for podcasters to learn. They're like, my first X episodes are terrible. They're supposed to be. My first 10, 15, 20, 50 episodes are the worst. I didn't start getting, I'm glad you in the notes you sent over, it's on episode 120 that it really clicked for you. It's probably on the same for me. It was on episode 80, 90, 100, where, I got in the flow of things, I got in the rhythm of things, I got better equipment. So like my first 50 episodes, give or take. Well, first off, I had a host last 10 episodes. So actually next week, we're recording this on February 9th. The next week is my 8-year anniversary in podcasting. The Kings, thank you. I know, pat in the back. The Kings of the Rings podcast is my wrestling podcast. My first host made it like 9 episodes, and I was kind of lost. I almost quit because I can't do solo shows. And then my buddy Dave saved the podcast. But I'm in college. I'm broke. I had one mic because I got a kit off Amazon for $99 in 2015, and we did podcasts passing one mic back and forth for a long time. And then when we brought in my buddy Ricky, who's still my co-host to this day, and around episode 36. I had one mic, and Ricky had another mic because he was an MC. I had my mic because I was the first mic, and they passed the mic back and forth between the two of them. So it wasn't around until episode 100 where we got 3 microphones. And then it started getting good, and then it started picking up. But those first 100 episodes are absolutely unlistenable. And for podcasters out there, that's the point. It's growth. It takes a long time to get good at this. It takes a long time to find your voice. And you, Travis, you are a very well-spoken, you seem like a very intelligent man. I'm surprised it took you 120 episodes, but I'm glad you did find your footing. So what was the biggest problem? Like, what did you not like about the first 120? What was your biggest struggle?
Well, the first 30 were this sucked, and then the next, I was like you. I didn't have good technology. Nothing really changed until about episode 70 or 80 when I got my Zoom H6, and then life got a lot easier. And then I think around like 87, 90, I interviewed. She's was a DJ for WAF up here, Mistress Carrie, big veteran support. She came on my show and really kind of encouraged me to stick at it. And it wasn't that 120 is where it kind of clicked for me in the fact that I was really getting frustrated that I wasn't getting the listens and the downloads, and I was really focused on downloads because I would talk to other podcasters, and it's like, oh, you only got like 100 listeners or 100 followers on Facebook. I don't want to deal with you. I'm like, what in the world am I doing wrong? And 120, 117 is where I talked to this Army National Guard veteran. He's a contractor. His name's Steve Kimball. And I tell people all the time, we do the show with my Zoom and Dunkin' Donuts, which he's like, dude, that was weird. But he's like, okay, you don't have a studio. And I asked him, I said, well, did you like the experience? What do you think? He's like, I kind of dug it. He said, I don't know much. I don't know anything about this podcasting stuff, Travis. I don't. But he's like, you know what? I am a business owner. He's like, if you can take this podcasting stuff and add value to the topic or guest, you're not going to have any problems. You're going to be fine. And I got to tell you honestly, Will, that's when I'm like, whoa. And that was right around the time, it was, like 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, where Gary Vee was really hitting his stride. So between that and Gary Vee, I'm like, whoa, let's not worry about the number of downloads I'm getting. And instead, what I started doing was focusing on the value I could add to the person or topic in front of me. I really worked on making the experience about them. And man, when I did that, everything changed. It didn't matter how tired I was or what I had going on at work or with kids or whatever. The show became just a really purpose-driven, powerful thing for me.